Hi, everybody, and welcome to the State of the Rockies Project Speaker Series. This year our focus is large landscape conservation in the Rockies, exploring new conservation paradigms for the 21st century. So before we bring Jim Levitt, our speaker, out, I'd like to tell you all a little bit about the State of the Rockies Project. So the mission of the State of the Rockies Project is building on 130 years of service to the region. The Rockies Project conducts state-of-the-art research, helping Rockies residents clearly see our communities, our environment, and our economy so we can better shape our future. Now, the focus of the project is in the Rockies region, the 8-state region, as you can see here: Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. And traditionally, the way that we carry out our mission is by following our motto, which is research, report, and engage. So the research aspect, I was lucky enough to be a student researcher for this year's State of the Rockies project. The largest component is a summer research time, and basically it's focused on student-faculty collaborative research. This included about 10 weeks of your traditional library, phone calls, internet, and then we had 2 weeks that were fieldwork focused up in Montana and Wyoming, where we got to meet stakeholders, managers, tribes, landowners, and it was a very informative trip, really great time. And during our time this year, our focus has been on new conservation paradigms. And so we put together case studies of interesting work that's being done in conservation. So on to report. Classically, the State of the Rockies has put out the report card. This is our 11th year, and as you can see, we've already put out 10, and we're hoping to do another this year. That will come out in the spring. But in addition to that, this year we've also partnered with the Large Landscape Conservation Practitioners Network. On the left here, you can see a map that they've done, and this is an inventory report of organizations that are pursuing large landscape conservation. Generally, for us, the definition of large landscape conservation that we've used is multi-jurisdictional, and looking at whole ecosystems and landscapes and the environmental effects therein. So what we've tried to do to supplement their work, this on the right is some of our work. These are maps that we've created, and then the pinpoints, you can click them, they'll lead you to case studies of the work that we've done. And now the case studies we put together, basically context about each organization, what they've been doing that's interesting, what's different, what's been working, what hasn't, lessons learned, and we're hoping that that's a useful tool for practitioners. And so the final component of research, report, and engage, of course, is engage. And you have all come to one of our outreach programs, the speaker series. In addition, we also have a conference in the spring with dates and speakers that will be announced in the future. And many of you may know the Rockies expeditions. We have shown trailers before. Some of you know Source to Sea or Down the Colorado with some great video work. And this year, we have put together another video. It's called The Spine of the Continent. And you can watch the trailer for that at stateoftherockies.com. It's right on the front page there. And we're also expanding into social media. So feel free to check out our Facebook page. Give it a like if you like what you see. Here are some pictures. Top two are from Source to Sea. There's a solar raft there across Lake Powell. The Sangre de Cristo, some repeat glacial photography that the State of the Rockies has been a part of. The expedition teams have done. And so an upcoming event, the next event in the speaker series, this is Todd Wilkinson. He's written a book called Last Stand, Ted Turner's Quest to Save a Troubled Planet. And if you know anything about Ted Turner, he's categorized as an eco-capitalist. He's doing some really interesting things with his wealth, and so it'll be a really interesting talk Monday, December 9th. And without further ado, tonight's speaker is Jim Levitt, and he'll be giving a talk entitled Large Landscape Initiatives and the Future of American Land Conservation. Now, Jim is the director of the Program on Conservation Innovation at the Harvard Forest at Harvard University. He's also a fellow at the Lincoln Institute for Land Policy. Jim has written or edited dozens of articles and 3 books relating to land and biodiversity conservation. So would you please join me in welcoming Jim Levitt.
So I think this lavalier mic works. I have to say that I am tremendously excited to be here. I am the father of a junior at Colorado College who's sitting right here, and I'm so glad to be with him. I am also the uncle of a recent graduate of Colorado College. He graduated 2 years ago, who comes from St. Louis, and I come from Boston. So we had a chance to catch up on the World Series, and that was so much fun. So this is just awesome. I'm also glad to be here because Colorado College, whether or not you all realize it, casts a very large shadow in the large landscape world from here all the way to southern Chile. People have heard about State of the Rockies in China, and they're going to hear about it in Europe. And I know this because I've told them myself what tremendous work you do. When I tried to characterize what it is about, this mic is going to continue to give me trouble, about CC's work, I ask people sometimes to think about the advice given by Aristotle in 350 BC. He said that there are 3 elements that you need in a talk to be persuasive, to make a persuasive argument. Those elements are ethos, authority, credibility of the speaker, pathos, or passion, and logos, or logic, the apparent truth of an argument. I know that these rhetorical tools are used at CC because the film that we had up here on the screen before we started incorporated all of those elements, as seen from Waterville, Maine to Valdivia, Chile. The film was produced by a 19-year-old sophomore at Colorado College who's not here right now, a young man named Alex Suber. A 19-year-old, and he's influencing audiences around the world. That is very impressive. Let me show you what I mean. These are a couple of screenshots translated into Spanish subtitles so that the audience in Chile could understand it. All of the students here have ethos the minute they matriculate into this institution. I happen to know, because of my family's involvement here, that this is the best small college between Iowa and California. In this part of the country, you have no peers. So when Colorado College speaks, people certainly listen. All they aimed to do was come up with a strategy to save the Colorado River basin. The film clearly involves pathos. Here's Zack and Will, the 2 explorers on the bottom of the screen, walking out into some wilderness in Wyoming, I believe, ready to traverse the entire river. And all their hacky-sack playing compatriots are watching them every paddle along the way. And of course, the State of the Rockies report card gives us the logos, the logic that you all are getting from people like Walt Hecox, who's hidden in the audience somewhere. Walt, will you raise your hand, please? Who has run the State of the Rockies project for 10 years now and just done a tremendous job, as well as Brendan Beppel and everybody else who worked so hard on this project. So I tip my hat to you. I really think you've done a tremendous job. And I'll show you why a little bit as we get into this presentation. But before I do, let me share with you what I mean by conservation innovation. I mean something very specific. A landmark conservation innovation is something that literally leaves a mark on the map and on the landscape. If you go to a protected landscape in Colorado, protected by the state government or the federal government or private landowners, at the boundary of that property, you're going to see the difference in the condition of that property versus its neighbor. Large landscape conservation initiatives are characterized by 5 attributes. So innovation's a big topic at CC right now. Everybody's trying to think, what is innovation? I think real innovation is characterized by novelty or creativity in conception, strategic significance to the field in which the innovation is being applied, measurable effectiveness. I'm going to come back to measurable effectiveness again and again. An innovation isn't an innovation if it just makes you feel good because you're doing something nice in the world. It's truly an innovation if it makes a difference that is transferable to other jurisdictions, and a difference which can endure over time. And by over time, I don't mean something like an innovation in the semiconductor industry, where if you make an innovation and it lasts for 5 years, you've done a good job. In the field of conservation, where we're trying to protect resources in perpetuity, whatever exactly that means, we're looking for innovations that can last for decades, or a century, or even multiple centuries. That's a tall, tall order. There are 3 factors of success for these innovations. All we need to get them done is advanced technology, inventive organizational and financial tools, and exceptional talent. Walt has been telling me for a long time, and I am now quite convinced, that there's a tremendous amount of exceptional talent in this room. Now, I'm going to start back at the beginning of conservation innovation in what we now call the United States. Usually when I ask audiences, where did conservation innovation start, they raise their hands and I hear about Teddy Roosevelt in about 1900 in Yosemite. And that answer would be wrong on 3 counts. Actually, the first land protected in a democratic context in what is now the United States was a 50-acre parcel of land right in the middle of Boston Neck that we know today as the Boston Common. This land was protected under the leadership of a guy named John Winthrop, who was a politician, a church leader, and an educator, who told his congregation before they even left England, "For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us." This guy was making no small plans. He intended to change the world that he knew. He really wanted to reform the Church of England. And he compared himself to the people in the Bible in Jerusalem, the city on a hill. So he was an ambitious guy. In 1634, 4 years after he established the city of Boston and gave the people living there the right to vote in town meetings to keep them coherent as a whole, as a body politic, Reverend John Blackstone, who actually lived on the Boston Neck before the Puritans got there, decided he had had enough of their rules and elected to move to what is now Rhode Island to study his books. He, like John Winthrop, went to Cambridge University. And if you think university graduates are rare and special today, in the 1630s, they were really exceptional people. Reverend Blackstone offered the Bostonians his land for sale. And the people of Boston, who elected their magistrates, allowed in a town meeting for each house to be taxed 6 shillings to collect the money to buy the open space, which is today the Boston Common. This is taxation for conservation, perhaps self-taxation for conservation, perhaps the first time in the English-speaking world that ever happened. A far cry from the no taxation without representation that launched the American Revolution 150 years later. So these people were consciously allowing themselves to be taxed to protect open space that they used for a cow pasture and for training purposes, And within 30 years, the young gallants were escorting their marmoset madams, their sweethearts, out onto the common for recreation. So we had a multi-purpose piece of open space created by the people, for the people, almost 400 years ago. If you ever in the Southwest, and I know there are people running around the Southwest who like to say this, hear the argument that conservation is un-American, ask them which America they're talking about. This goes back to the very foundation of our republic, to the invention of local democracy. So here's the Boston Common that they created, and this innovation took a long time to catch on. There was actually a park in North America prior to the Boston Common, but that was created by the King of Spain in St. Augustine. Boston, again, was the first open space created in a democratic context. There were as many as 8 open spaces that we count in North America by 1700, 17 in 1800, and a total of 62 when Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux created New York's Central Park in the 1850s and 1860s. Now, even though New Yorkers claim that Central Park is America's first park, maybe they can get away with the argument that it's America's premier city park, but it is not the first. Okay, today, this innovation has caught on and is ubiquitous. And I like to ask audiences this: does anyone know of a jurisdiction, a local jurisdiction, a county, a town, a city in the United States that does not have a public park? I've asked this question many, many times, and I don't know of one. Someone said, well, maybe there's one in Indiana, but I haven't found it yet. So this is an innovation that was novel in conception, that was strategically significant, has been measurably affected. For example, the most valuable real estate in New England surrounds the Boston Common, has been transferable to almost every jurisdiction in the United States of America, and has endured for almost 400 years. That's a landmark. All right, that is the beginning of a little geometric progression I'm going to talk about. We're talking about protecting a spot of land, and the people of Boston recognized it as a spot of land. They said when someone threatened to build a gun house on the Common in 1799, a long broadside that was posted in the streets of Boston, and I will try not to be too loud with my passion on this because I'll break the microphone. Resolve that from the principles of justice, gratitude, and parental affection, we would today call that intergenerational equity, you will never, never suffer a building from a palace to a gun house to be placed upon that devoted spot, the Common. Boston, 25 September 1799. So 50 years before Olmsted, 100 years before Teddy Roosevelt, the people of Boston were exercising political advocacy to protect their open spaces. They saw this as a sacred piece of land that their forefathers had given them and that they would never give up. And today, to this date, they have not. Okay, next I want to jump from a dot, from a spot to a line. Really protected open spaces as destinations at the end of railroad lines. The picture you see here is of a young Unitarian minister named Thomas Starr King, who first wrote about the White Mountains in New Hampshire and went to California in 1860, A, to save California for the Union, and B, to write in the Boston transcript about the magnificent place that he'd found with some of his friends at Yosemite. The pictures that Carlton Watkins sent back to Boston and to Washington, we believe Abraham Lincoln looked at these pictures, helped to convince Congress for the first time that the nation should set aside open space for the benefit of the people. Yosemite was set aside as something that was inalienable a word that comes from earlier political documents, inalienable to the people of California, never to be taken away. It later became a national park. The railroads, this is of course the transcontinental railroad that you see snaking across the western United States, realized the value of this destination well before the railroad was completed. They paid for Albert Bierstadt to travel across the country and paint these fantastic images of Yosemite in 1863 in the middle of the American Civil War, because when that railroad was done, they wanted Easterners to get on the railroad line and get out west and see the wonders that were out there. For aesthetic reasons, for commercial reasons, they had a lot of real estate that they wanted to sell, for political reasons, there was a whole complex of reasons to do this. But this is the first example that we know of a nation, a democratically elected government, setting aside land for their people. And in 1872, Ulysses Grant created Yellowstone, 1 million acres, which was the first national park in the world. Up to 1872, there was no such thing as a national park. This idea caught on. Even here in the building that we're sitting in, that I'm standing in, we have relations to the people who helped to bring parks out to the west. There was a general, William Jackson Turner, who you've all heard about, who brought the railroad from Denver down to Colorado Springs, and he invited his good friend Charles Eliot Perkins to buy some land outside of Colorado Springs because he just wanted his friend to be there. And they thought maybe there was tourism at the end of the rainbow. In 1909, I believe, Perkins had passed away, and his family gave Red Rocks to the city of Colorado Springs as a place for public enjoyment without alcohol that would be protected forever. And I know that virtually everybody in this room has been out there to see this incredible wonder. The Burlington Railroad, which Perkins was president of, heavily promoted this place and Colorado Springs as an exceptional tourist destination. But even people like Perkins and Jackson and Stanford, who built a hotel in California to bring the tourists out to see Yosemite, could not imagine how popular this innovation might become. This is a graph of visitation to Yosemite. Right now, we're peaking out at about 4 million visitors a year. That is dramatic growth from 1905, 35 years after Yosemite was protected, when we were down in the single digits of thousands of people. Again, an innovation that was novel, significant, measurably effective, transferable, and enduring. There are now nearly 1 billion acres of national park in the world, in 120 nations that are members of the United Nations, many of whom are going to meet at a meeting that I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. Again, something invented in America that has had a global impact. A third innovation involving not a local government or the federal government, but private citizens banding together to establish a private association that would hold beautiful bits of land the way that the library held books and the museum holds pictures. This young man is Charles Eliot. He is the son of the president of Harvard University and a protege of Frederick Law Olmsted. And he proposed that around Boston there should be a set of reserves held by what is today known as the trustees of reservations that would benefit the public based on private philanthropy. The trustees of reservations, which he helped establish, was the first land trust in the world. I just met earlier tonight someone who has directed the Palmer Land Trust. He's sitting right over there. And there are 1,700 land trusts around the world, and this is a movement that's spreading from Chile to China, believe it or not, where there is no such thing as private land. but they still want land trusts. So this is, again, this is an idea that has grown dramatically over time, particularly with the invention of the tax-deductible conservation easement, which helped land trusts grow from about 2 million acres protected in 1985 to nearly 20 million acres today just by local and statewide land trusts. This does not include the Nature Conservancy and some of the national land trusts. So again, an innovation that takes off with a curve that looks like cell phone sales. A really important impact that we hope will last for hundreds and hundreds of years. Okay, so that brings us to today and the people sitting in this room. We have at our disposal a lot of talent. We have incredible technologies. This is a USGS map using GIS technology that allows us to identify almost every single piece of protected open space in the whole United States. I couldn't get that on the map so you could see how specific it was. This is just part of New England and New York. But we can pinpoint things, and every single one of us can get on Google Maps and zoom right up to the house that our friend owns that's on Saranac Lake in New York, and oh my God, there it is. We can tell with incredible specificity with satellites that are continually circling the Earth where the dry spots are and where the wet places are. This is a map drawn in 2012 during the drought. Every brown pixel on that map shows a place where the vegetation is below normal. The green spots in Nevada and part of California and up in Canada is where the vegetation was above normal. If State of the Rockies hasn't convinced you that the West is water stressed related to climate change, perhaps this graphic will. These satellites are going around the Earth continually. We know exactly where the dry spots are and where they are not. We can also tell in virtually real time where the strongest storms ever recorded are happening. This is from this morning's internet feed. This is a graphic of Typhoon High a couple of days ago, and the graphic reads, the title reads below as follows. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center has increased its estimate of Haiyan's maximum sustained winds to 195 miles per hour with gusts up to 235 miles per hour. That's nearly as fast as the strongest gusts ever recorded on top of Mount Washington, some of the strongest winds ever recorded on Earth. And this is a huge swath of seascape that you're looking at. The storm is now within a few hours of landfall in the central Philippines at peak intensity as among the most powerful storms witnessed anywhere in modern times. Widespread destruction, unfortunately, seems inevitable. If you've glanced at the news in the last couple of days, you know that these warmer oceans that helped to spawn this incredible storm has had an awful toll. So we know what's going on. There are people among us who may deny that this is caused by human interaction, and that makes for an interesting debate. But we know what's happening in the world, and anybody who has access to the internet can get as specific as they like. What we're still learning, however, goes back to this geographic analogy. So these systems that Charles Eliot helped to create, that is, the systems of land trusts around Boston, or the systems of national forests and national parks and national wildlife refuges, are most impressive, but they're still stovepipes. The federal government agencies aren't known for for how superior they are in collaborating with one another, even across their borders, much less with land trusts, or with private landowners, or with the land owned by universities and other institutions. We need to move if we're to address the incredible challenges we have in the 21st century, beyond lots of little isolated systems, to something that's familiar to all of us. If you look up in the corner of this graphic, you'll see a depiction 15 years ago of the global internet. It would be probably impossible to draw all of those interconnections today. But it's a very dense, very interconnected network of networks. If I want to send an email to a colleague of mine at a university in China, I push the send button on my Gmail account, and it might go through 50 different email systems, but it gets to her desk just like that. And she can answer me at the same time or call me on Skype, and we can communicate across this network of networks in a way that makes the messaging interoperable. We don't care what's between Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Beijing. The networks all work together for our communication purposes. Analogously, we need to think about how we can make the incredible array of protected lands that we have in the 21st century become interoperable for the purposes of wildlife conservation, for clean water, for air that hopefully we can get control of some of the emissions of carbon dioxide, and for the amenities that bring, I would say, probably a vast majority of the students to this spot so they can look out their window at Pikes Peak. At the Lincoln Institute, as was mentioned before, we are counting the large landscape conservation initiatives across the country. We are getting people to collaborate with one another, and it's heartening to see how many of these. There are actually hundreds of these cross-jurisdictional, cross-sectoral, actually across international boundary initiatives there are to achieve this objective, which is just emerging today. But to say that we're collaborating across boundaries isn't really enough. It's one of those things that feels good, like the fact that you met an AFS student at high school. Okay, that's nice. What did you get out of that? What difference does it make? What's the measurable outcome of that organizational feat? We have lots of cases now where the measurable outputs have been dramatic. There was a picture of a guy named Jim Stone up here that you showed, who started something called the Blackfoot Challenge, or helped to grow the Blackfoot Challenge. They have accomplished a 99% reduction in bear-human interactions in the Blackfoot Valley to protect both humans and bears so that we don't have a lot of loss of bears across public land, private land, nonprofit land. We have done a tremendous job in the crown of the continent, which is this area that crosses the border of Montana, British Columbia, and Alberta, in addressing invasive species. Because of course, if you take the invasive species out of the national forest and that effort stops at the boundary line with the private landowner, what good have you really done? You know that those invasive species are just going to blow across that boundary in the next growing season. I'm going to show you a graphic of the Boston Harbor cleanup and of this Valdivian Coastal Reserve to demonstrate this even more. These are graphics of an immense multi-billion-dollar cleanup of Boston Harbor. The purple that you see in that far upper corner there are the terribly polluted areas of Boston Harbor between 1987 and 1991. This graphic shows the progress made between 1992 and 1998. The bottom shows the places that you can't usually swim in, now in 1999 to 2007. You can see that working across jurisdictions, working with industry, working with local governments, working with the federal government, we've done an amazing job at cleaning up Boston Harbor. And my family was just out on the Boston Harbor Islands not very long ago, and it is a beautiful, beautiful sight to behold. Visitors are coming out there, doubling over 10 years and continuing to grow. The same thing is beginning to happen in places like Chile. This is the Valdivian Coastal Reserve on the left side, the yellow, that was protected by the Nature Conservancy in partnership with the regional government and the national government, which has protected the Alerce Costero National Park on the right-hand side. 15 years ago, nearly all of this property was owned by a timber company that was cutting down these Alerce trees, which are like our redwoods or our sequoias, and replanting them with eucalyptus. Some advocacy pressure caused the Chilean government to change the native forest laws, and now we're protecting vast areas of open space. This Valdivian Coastal Reserve that I had the chance to visit in April has a 9-kilometer long, absolutely pristine white sand beach that should be protected just as that, with the seals swimming through the surf from now until, I don't know how long, from now until there's no longer the kind of government that we now have in Chile. And you have Colorado college students in the state of the Rockies participating in an immense and daunting large landscape challenge to recover the delta of the Colorado River between the US-Mexico border and the Sea of Cortez. These are 2 screenshots from the movie that you saw, translated into Spanish so that, again, the Chileans could see it. Ken Salazar at Colorado College saying, "We hear you, we understand your report, we're going to do something about this." Now, Colorado College certainly was not the only entity making noise about this. The University of Arizona has had a research network working on this for 20 years. Fat Tire Brewery in Fort Collins has this incredibly inventive advertising campaign where you see people's naked backsides advocating for the protection of the Colorado River Delta. The Nature Conservancy, the Sonoran Institute, we've got a vast number of organizations advocating for this. But the fact is that on November 20th, 2012, after Salazar came and talked at his alma mater at Colorado College, the United States and Mexico signed an agreement to allocate water to the Colorado River Delta in Mexico to bring back habitat, in part for migratory birds. That is a huge first step that needs to be monitored now for many years to come. At the Lincoln Institute and at the Harvard Forest, we have several new ongoing efforts to try to enhance the role of collaboration across sectors, especially the role that colleges and universities and research stations play in all this. It's called Conservation Catalysts. Walt Hecox was at one of our meetings of Conservation Catalysts in Boulder about 2 years ago. This fellow right here works for the Sonoran Institute, and he's explaining how we're going to bring the Colorado River Delta back. We're taking this work on the role of universities and colleges to the IUCN's World Parks Congress in Sydney, Australia in 2014. The Lincoln Institute just issued a call for papers where we're asking for students and young graduates of colleges and universities and research facilities to submit papers, and we're going to take 4 or 5 of those young people with us to Sydney to get up on the stage and to tell the delegates how important the work that they're doing is in helping to achieve these very important objectives. I hope that there's some clever Colorado College students who submit papers for this contest. We're looking for contributions in the natural sciences, in the social sciences, in the policy and professional studies area, and yes, in the humanities and the creative arts. Alex Suber's film is an example of really something that's a film project that's helped, get very enthusiastic applause in southern Chile. The website for this is conservationcatalyst.org. If you're interested in this, email us as studentsascatalysts@gmail.com. We've got about 2 months for this competition to occur. So, the task in front of all of us, and especially the young people in this audience, is pretty straightforward. All I'm asking you to do is to come up with conservation innovations that leave a mark on the map, that are novel and creative, that are strategically significant, that are measurably effective over time, that are transferable maybe as far as Utah or maybe to Uganda, and have an ability to endure for a long, long time. My advice to you, if you decide to get involved in this enterprise, is bring the best technology you can, the most talented people, and some inventive organization and financial tools. We, that is my colleagues at the Lincoln Institute, at the Harvard Forest, and I personally look forward to working with many of you in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.